These past few nights, I've had the unsettling feeling that someone's been sneaking kisses from me while I slept. Among my 3 roommates, 2 are happily taken, and the third is the aloof campus heartthrob who barely spares me a glance. Determined to unmask the culprit, I coated my lips with a fiery, extra spicy chili bomb before bed. By the next morning, all 4 of us had swollen lips. Welcome to He History Channel. Subscribe to follow all our latest adventures. Story begins. Can chili sauce really make your lips swell? Piece of cake. If it doesn't, send it back and I'll apply it to my hemorrhoids myself. The seller's confidence was so convincing that I didn't hesitate. I placed an order for a bottle of Indian ghost pepper chili sauce without a second thought. Lately, something strange has been happening. Since last week, I've been dreaming about kissing someone. In those dreams, the sensation is vivid, soft lips, a faint, cool fragrance, so real that it feels like it's actually happening. At first, I brushed it off, enjoying the nightly escapades with a casual, "It's just a dream. Dreams don't break the law" mindset. But after a few days, an unsettling realization hit me. Wait, is this really just a dream? Someone might actually be sneaking kisses from me while I sleep. The suspects? My 3 roommates, who all seem like typical straight guys. Thomas Lombard has a long-distance girlfriend. Joseph Freeman spends his nights yelling, "Wife," at Nami from One Piece. And then there's Matthew Grant, the campus heartthrob and, by all accounts, the straightest of them all. He's practically allergic to men. Forget friendly shoulder pats. If someone so much as brushes against him, his eyebrows furrow so tightly you'd think he was trying to squash a mosquito. He's distant, cold, and barely acknowledges my existence. So, I mentally crossed Matthew Grant off the suspect list. That leaves Thomas and Joseph. I'll find out which one of these 2 is hiding in the closet and pretending to be straight. The chili sauce arrived in the afternoon, courtesy of a local seller. To avoid collateral damage, I took extra precautions before bed, wrapping my lips in a thin layer of plastic wrap before applying the fiery sauce. As I slipped on my sleep mask, a cold smirk curled on my lips. Using extreme heat to deal with an extreme pervert? Perfectly fitting. When the lights went out, the dorm room descended into silence. Then, out of nowhere, Thomas Lombard, who slept across from me, suddenly spoke as if something had just occurred to him. His voice carried through the darkness, casual but loud enough to jolt me awake. "Hey, Matthew, what were you doing standing by Eric Miller's bed in the middle of the night yesterday? I swear I saw someone and nearly had a heart attack." I was on the verge of falling asleep, but those words snapped me awake instantly. My ears perked up, sharp as antennae. From the far corner of the room, a deep and steady voice responded, calm as ever. "Me? You must have been mistaken. The one with a sleepwalking problem is Joseph Freeman." Thomas sounded uncertain. "Really? I could have sworn the figure matched your height." "What?" My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Could it be Matthew Grant? Was he the one sneaking kisses from me? As I debated whether to wipe off the chili sauce, Joseph, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice muffled under his blanket. "Thomas, that's kind of insulting, don't you think? I'm not short, okay? So, it was you last night?" "Well," Joseph mumbled awkwardly, retreating further under his covers. "I haven't had a sleepwalking episode in ages. But, maybe it really was me?" I had to hand it to Matthew Grant. He was a master at deflection. With just one sentence, he'd made both Thomas and Joseph question their own reality. Lifting my sleep mask slightly, I glanced in Matthew's direction. There he was, lying perfectly still on his bed. His posture was as meticulous and composed as the man himself, stiff, precise, almost robotic. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't picture him sneaking around in the dark, let alone doing something as impulsive as kissing me. I shook my head silently. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Matthew Grant would never do something like that. His lips were far too precious. He barely used them to speak, let alone kiss someone, especially not a man. The next day was a blissful weekend, and I allowed myself the luxury of waking up naturally. The moment I opened my eyes, I reached for my phone on the pillow beside me and switched to the front-facing camera. Sure enough, a chunk of the chili-coated plastic wrap was missing, clearly in the shape of a pair of lips. The mental image struck me instantly, someone crawling out of bed in the dead of night, sneaking over to my side, leaning down toward me, only to end up with a mouthful of blazing heat. I couldn't help it. I burst into uncontrollable laughter, pounding the mattress as tears pricked the corners of my eyes. But it was time to inspect the results of my little trap. Humming to myself, I hopped out of bed, only to notice that the room was eerily quiet. Matthew Grant was the only one there, seated at his desk with a book in hand. "Where's Thomas and Joseph?" I asked casually. Without turning around, Matthew replied in a tone colder than usual, "Don't know." I raised an eyebrow, annoyed by his frosty attitude. "Fine, you don't know. No need to act like I owe you money," I thought, rolling my eyes as I turned toward the bathroom. But then, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye, freezing me in place. The window's glass reflected a faint outline of Matthew's face. If my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, "Matthew Grant, you dropped something?" Matthew didn't think twice, instinctively glancing down toward the floor. That was when I got a clear look. His lips, his precious, golden, always reserved lips, were swollen. Matthew Grant's usually perfect, thin lips were now swollen to twice their normal size, looking like two bright red sausages plastered onto his otherwise handsome face. I stared at him, utterly speechless. This felt like a surreal dream. You, I pointed at him, my finger trembling as I struggled to get the words out. "So it was you sneaking kisses from me?" Matthew froze, his body visibly stiffening. Only then did he realize I'd been baiting him. He glanced at me briefly before quickly averting his gaze, his expression betraying a rare flicker of panic. "What? I have no idea what you're talking about." His denial made my blood boil. Evidence was written all over his face, literally, and he still dared to play dumb? Just as I was about to confront him, the dorm room door burst open behind me. Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman, who'd been missing all morning, walked in. Their lower faces also featured two suspiciously swollen sausages where their lips should have been. I stood there, as if struck by lightning. "What happened to your lips?" Asked what if. They couldn't have all taken turns sneaking kisses from me last night, could they? Thomas scratched the back of his head sheepishly. His voice came out garbled, courtesy of his swollen lips. "Oh, it's nothing. We were trying that trending super spicy chips challenge. That stuff's so hot, I nearly saw my great-grandma." "Spicy chips? Where did you even get them?" "Adam Brown from the dorm next door. He got them as part of a review. There were 4 extra boxes, so he gave them to us." Thomas pointed toward my desk. "There's a box for you too. Wanna try? It's intense, but totally worth it." I forced a stiff smile, my jaw clenched as I ground out my reply. "No thanks. I have no desire to rock the same swollen lips as you, Sup." Thomas's explanation made perfect sense. Adam Brown, our neighbor, was a semi-popular food blogger known for testing all kinds of bizarre, borderline unpalatable dishes. And that's exactly what frustrated me the most. Why did Adam have to choose today of all days to share those chips? Of all times, why now? My perfectly laid plan, ruined. After all that effort, the real culprit remained elusive. I scanned the dorm, taking in the sight of 3 swollen-lipped suspects. Matthew Grant sat at his desk, a gold-rimmed pair of glasses perched on his sharp nose. His demeanor was icy and detached, exuding an air of indifference to everyone and everything around him. Thomas Lombard, a towering 6-foot-something hulk of muscle, was busy video chatting with his long-distance girlfriend, whining with exaggerated affection, "Baby, I miss you so much." Meanwhile, Joseph Freeman was glued to his anime, freezing the screen every time a voluptuous heroine appeared, practically pressing his face against the display for a closer look. Compared to them, I was starting to think I might be the one who looked the most like a suspect. Still, maybe it really was Joseph Freeman. After all, our beds were right next to each other. If he was feeling starved for affection and decided to compensate through his sleepwalking episodes, I'd naturally be his first victim. The thought made me feel oddly relieved. Bolstered by a newfound sense of clarity, I approached Matthew Grant. Clearing my throat, I said earnestly, Bro, I owe you an apology. My tone earlier was a little harsh. I might have jumped to the wrong conclusion about you. Matthew didn't turn around. His hand, however, tightened around the edge of his book, leaving faint creases in its once pristine pages. Wrong conclusion about what? Stealing kisses? Awkwardness engulfed me instantly. To Matthew, this misunderstanding must have seemed both absurd and laughably self-centered. But swallowing my embarrassment, I managed a faint, yeah. At last, Matthew granted me a glance. He closed his book and fixed me with a calm, unreadable gaze. And what if I said it really was me? Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Then he smirked faintly, his tone as cool as ever. Relax. I'm just kidding. Look at you, so easy to scare. Matthew picked up his book again, resuming his reading as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I let out a shaky breath, my body sagging with relief. Wiping a bead of cold sweat from my forehead, I tried to steady my racing heart. Damn it, how rare. Even Matthew Grant knows how to crack a joke now. I almost peed myself from the shock. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of something in Matthew's gaze, something fleeting and almost imperceptible, but undeniably dimmer than before. He spoke again, his tone light, almost casual. You're probably homophobic, right? His question caught me off guard. I froze for a moment before instinctively shaking my head. Why would I be homophobic? I replied without thinking. I am gay. I've liked Matthew Grant for 4 years. But he doesn't know. And he never will. Because Matthew Grant is the one who's homophobic. I learned that lesson the hard way. Back in our first year, when I was still secretly overjoyed at being assigned to the same dorm as him, life served me a brutal reality check. It happened one day in the laundry room. I had gone to grab my clothes, and as I approached the door, I overheard voices from inside. Matthew, I like you. Peeking through the small crack in the door, I saw the speaker, Bruce Young. He was practically a campus celebrity, famous for his exquisite looks and ballroom dancing skills. People called him the dreamboat of the gay scene and the top slayer's kryptonite. Even a straight guy would hesitate for a second before politely rejecting someone like Bruce Young. But unfortunately for him, he had chosen the wrong target. Matthew Grant's already unreadable expression turned visibly colder. He scoffed, his tone cutting as he delivered a brutal rejection. From that day onward, I became a straight guy. At least, in front of Matthew Grant, that's what I pretended to be. What choice did I have? If someone as stunning as Bruce Young couldn't even make a dent in Matthew's armor, what chance did I stand? If I confessed, he'd probably gag on the spot. I had no interest in witnessing that humiliation firsthand. Too much self-respect. What are you guys talking about? The sudden interruption of Matthew's deep voice was like a shard of ice tossed into boiling water, instantly silencing the room. Thomas Lombard, Joseph Freeman, and I exchanged bewildered glances. For reasons we couldn't fathom, the usually aloof Matthew Grant had recently started showing interest in our lowbrow conversations, and even attempted to join in. His efforts at social interaction were clumsy at best, but it was so rare we couldn't help but feel a little flattered. Thomas was the first to recover, grinning at Matthew. We were talking about this cat whose name is Dip-da-dee-da-dee-da-do-do. I know that one. Joseph and I immediately burst into uncontrollable laughter, our shared bizarre sense of humor taking over. Tears streamed down our faces as we doubled over, gasping for air. Matthew's gaze lingered on me, and for the first time, he smiled, a small tug at the corner of his mouth. I noticed and froze, momentarily stunned. There was no denying it. When Matthew Grant smiled, he was devastatingly handsome. The curve of his lips softened the coldness etched into his brows, leaving behind an indescribable charm that was utterly mesmerizing. Eric, why are you staring at Matthew like that? I've been calling you for ages, and you didn't even notice? Thomas waved a hand in front of my face, snapping me out of my daze. Blushing furiously, I tore my gaze away, missing the fleeting glimmer in Matthew's eyes. What's up? I stammered. Class is about to start. Pack your stuff and let's go. Alright, got it. It was our first swimming class of college. By the time I stepped out of the changing room, Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman were already standing by the pool in their swim trunks, raring to go. Thomas grinned and suggested, let's do a race. 1 round, see who's the fastest. Sure, what's the wager? Joseph cracked his knuckles, clearly up for the challenge. Loser treats the whole dorm to dinner this weekend. Deal. In a flash, the two of them dove into the pool and disappeared beneath the surface. I couldn't help but twitch the corner of my mouth. Ah, the joys of being young and stupid. As I turned around, my gaze landed on something, or rather, someone, that made me stop in my tracks. In the pool, there was a figure gliding effortlessly through the water. His physique was impeccable, and his strokes were smooth, powerful, and undeniably elegant. But none of that was what caught my attention. What froze me in place was, he was peeing. The pool water, freshly replaced and crystal clear, betrayed him in the most spectacular way. He must have been dehydrated or something because the stream he left behind was as vivid as a jet plane's contrail, a long yellow line trailing behind him. And if that wasn't ridiculous enough, his abdominal muscles must have been working overtime, because every push forward was accompanied by little bubbles rising from his backside. The scene was both grotesque and mesmerizing, and I found myself staring, utterly dumbfounded. Then, from behind me, a voice drifted over, low and calm. Enjoying the view? I nodded reflexively. Yeah, it's great. The words were out before I realized who had spoken. Matthew Grant. Whipping around, I barely registered his perfectly sculpted abs before blurting, "Look at that guy." Before I could finish, Matthew abruptly dove into the pool with a sharp splash, cutting me off mid-sentence. In seconds, he was swimming right beside the culprit, engaging him in what looked like an impromptu race. I stood there, utterly flabbergasted, and muttered the rest of my thought to the now empty air. He's peeing in the pool. The campus heartthrob is truly in a league of his own. Matthew Grant wasn't just blessed with a face that could stop traffic, his physique was equally unmatched. Broad shoulders, a slim waist, long legs and pale, cool-toned skin. The way the water clung to his streamlined muscles, catching the light, made it impossible to look away. Yellow Line Gauge didn't stand a chance, he was utterly obliterated. By then, Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman had finished their race and climbed out of the pool. Standing beside me, they both let out synchronized sighs as they watched Matthew effortlessly cut through the water. Matthew is just built different, Thomas mused, shaking his head in awe. That body, that swim form, us mere mortals can only dream. Joseph nodded in solemn agreement. I opened my mouth to respond but decided against it. After a long pause, Thomas turned to me with a curious expression. Hey, by the way, why haven't you gotten in the pool yet, Eric? He hit the nail on the head. I sighed dramatically, putting on an air of profound wisdom. You two should go rinse off and stay out of the water for the rest of the day. Why? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but there's a jet plane in the pool. Thomas and Joseph exchanged confused looks. What else could I call someone who leaves a trail and bubbles like that? A jet plane it is. After I explained the bizarre antics of Yellow Line Guy, their faces contorted in a mix of horror and disgust before they bolted for the showers. Left alone by the pool, I casually held my towel, waiting for Matthew Grant to finish. But before long, someone silently appeared beside me. A soft voice broke the quiet. It must be wonderful to have Matthew as a roommate. I turned my head and found myself looking at a striking profile, a guy with sharp features, staring dreamily at Matthew as if he were the center of the universe. It wasn't surprising to see Bruce Young here. The swimming class had attracted quite a crowd of onlookers, drawn by the promise of watching the campus heartthrob in action. What did catch me off guard, though, was Bruce speaking to me. I scrambled to think of how a straight guy might respond in this situation. What's so great about it? We're just a couple of dudes. It's not like it's paradise or anything. Now, if he were a girl, then I might feel lucky. Bruce smiled faintly, not saying another word. To my utter shock, he casually draped an arm over my shoulder and rested his head against me. The faint scent of shampoo wafted up, clean and pleasantly distracting. I froze, completely stiff, too afraid to move. What the hell is going on here? We didn't even know each other before today. I wanted to push Bruce Young away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Let's be honest, facing a face like his, only someone as unshakably straight as Matthew Grant could remain indifferent. So there we stood, locked in a strange yet oddly intimate posture, both of us gazing at Matthew, who was cutting through the water like he owned it. Despite Yellow Line Gauge benefiting from his own peculiar form of jet propulsion, Matthew reached the wall first, effortlessly claiming victory. With a smooth motion, he swept his wet hair back, revealing a face so flawless it could have been sculpted by the gods. Every move he made radiated raw masculinity, drawing gasps of admiration from the spectators. Realizing he'd won, Matthew turned his gaze toward me, his expression glowing with triumph. But then, he noticed Bruce standing beside me, arms still casually draped over my shoulder. In an instant, the smile froze on his lips, and his eyes grew cold. Matthew doesn't know you like him, does he? Bruce's words shattered my composure like a bucket of ice water. I immediately fell back on the most overused line I could muster. What? I don't understand. Bruce, a seasoned veteran of the gay scene with a radar fine-tuned to detect family, chuckled softly. Don't bother denying it. I can see it clear as day. The way you look at Matthew is completely different from how you look at anyone else. At that point, there was no use keeping up the act. I've never been the most patient person, and while I might have felt a twinge of sympathy for Bruce before, thanks to his ill-fated confession to Matthew, that sympathy had its limits. This has nothing to do with you, I said curtly, shoving his arm off and glaring at him with thinly veiled hostility. To my surprise, Bruce wasn't offended. In fact, he smiled wider. Do you think, he leaned in slightly, his voice dripping with menace, that Matthew would react kindly if he found out his roommate, the guy he eats and sleeps alongside every day, is a gay man secretly lusting after him? For a fleeting moment, I had the absurd sensation that I might actually be homophobic. Because, seriously, this level of scheming is insane. After what felt like an eternity of staring each other down, Bruce Young finally broke eye contact and eagerly turned toward someone behind me. Matthew Grant, you're back, he greeted, his tone full of anticipation. I froze, my body stiff as I slowly turned around. There stood Matthew Grant, not far away, his sharp gaze locked on Bruce like he was sizing up a potential threat. Stay away from my roommate, Matthew said coldly. I'm not here for him. I'm here for you, Bruce replied, hastily explaining as he held out a towel in a gesture of goodwill. But Matthew didn't even glance at it. Instead, he stepped back as though Bruce were carrying something contagious, and barked, "Don't touch me with your stuff." The venom in his tone was unmistakable, cutting through the air like a whip. My pupils involuntarily constricted. Is his homophobia really this severe? By now, a small crowd had gathered. With both Matthew and Bruce being some of the most handsome and well-known guys on campus, it wasn't surprising that all eyes were on them. Bruce's expression flickered between shades of pale and red before he forced a strained smile. In a quiet voice, he asked, "Can we at least talk?" "There's nothing to talk about." "Move, I have things to do with my roommate," Matthew replied curtly. That last remark seemed to snap something inside Bruce. His already fragile composure shattered. With a sudden outburst, he flung the towel to the ground and shouted, "You avoid me because I'm gay, but your roommate's gay too. Why don't I see you keeping your distance from him?" My heart stopped. Panic surged through me as I turned my head slowly, almost robotically, to meet Matthew's stunned gaze. Oh no. The jig was up. Is it true what he said? The question came in the changing room. Matthew Grant, fully dressed and towering over me, fixed me with a penetrating gaze as I sat on the bench pulling on my socks. My hand faltered for a moment. Inside, I cursed Bruce Young 1,000 times over. Damn it, that bastard. It's bad enough he didn't get what he wanted, but dragging me down with him? What kind of twisted logic is that? I mentally replayed Bruce's pitiful exit earlier, the crowd's amused stares following him. Well, he deserved every second of it. But no matter how furious I was internally, I kept my face neutral. Shrugging, I tried to sound as casual as possible. It's true. But don't worry, I've never had any improper thoughts about you. It's just pure friendship between classmates. Matthew Grant stared at me for a few seconds, his silence weighing heavily. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge I hadn't expected. Then who do you like? Bruce? Do you even know what he's done? I cut him off abruptly. I don't like anyone. And I hope you don't hold any prejudice against me because of this. But if it really makes you uncomfortable? I paused, swallowing down the bitterness rising in my chest. Then I'll apply for a dorm transfer. What else could I do? This was all such senseless drama. Yes, I liked Matthew Grant, but I'd never crossed any lines with him. Not once. Even when he changed clothes in the dorm, I made it a point to look away. Well, okay, maybe I peeked once or twice, but that's it. And now, I was about to lose even those fleeting moments of joy. Could you blame me for feeling utterly defeated? My suggestion to transfer seemed to catch Matthew off guard. For a split second, I saw genuine panic flash across his face. I never said, absolutely not. The changing room door slammed open, and Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman barged in like stormtroopers, their expressions resolute. Thomas declared, "No way. Eric's not going anywhere." Joseph nodded in agreement, his eyes blazing with a fervor that could rival a political rally. "Matthew, we've been roommates for a long time now. We all know what kind of person Eric is. He's never treated us as anything but brothers. So what does it matter if he likes men or women? It doesn't change anything." I sat there, torn between gratitude and the overwhelming urge to disappear. Their support was touching, sure, but this level of drama was going to shave years off my life. Matthew listened without a word, his face unreadable. Just as he opened his mouth to respond, Thomas slapped a hand over it, silencing him. With a tragic expression, Thomas spoke as though he were making the ultimate sacrifice. "Matthew, if you really can't accept this, then you should be the one to move out." Matthew Grant. Who said I couldn't accept it? I'm not homophobic. And I'm the last person who'd want Eric Miller to move out? Not gonna lie, I almost teared up when I heard Matthew Grant say that. You could have told me sooner, damn it. For 2 whole years, I've been sneaking around like a thief just to watch gay dramas, burying myself under my blanket at night with my phone on the dimmest setting. The stress of it all was enough to choke me. Back in the dorm, the atmosphere between Matthew and me was awkward, to say the least. We both looked like we had things to say, but every time our eyes met, we'd quickly glance away like cowards. The tension was palpable, and Joseph Freeman and Thomas Lombard weren't blind to it. So they tried their best to lighten the mood. "Man, Yellow Line guy really put on a show today," Joseph started. "Right? I scrubbed so hard in the shower, I think I peeled off 2 layers of skin," Thomas added, his tone laced with exaggerated disgust. "Same here," Joseph chimed in. "I used up half a bottle of body wash. And we were breathing through our mouths while swimming. Who knows how much of that water we accidentally swallowed?" Gross. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing. But their vivid descriptions brought the memory crashing back, and the mental image of Yellow Line guy in all his glory played on repeat in my head. The next second I lost it. A loud laugh exploded out of me, so forceful I nearly shook the entire dorm building. Matthew, completely clueless about what we were talking about, furrowed his brows in confusion. "What's this Yellow Line guy you keep mentioning?" Thomas scratched his head, glancing at me. "Eric didn't tell you?" My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to stop Thomas, to keep him from spilling the whole sordid story. Matthew had a mild case of germophobia. He couldn't stand unpleasant smells or unclean environments. If he found out about this, it would ruin his day, maybe even his week. But I was too late. Thomas slapped his thigh enthusiastically. "Oh man, I have to tell you this. So, you know that guy you were swimming next to today?" I sighed and slowly lowered my hand, resigning myself to the inevitable. Let's just hope Matthew doesn't lose it entirely. With a crisp crack, the glass in Matthew Grant's hand shattered, scattering shards everywhere. He remained frozen in the motion of holding the now non-existent glass, staring blankly at the empty space in his hand. After a moment, his darkened gaze slowly turned toward me. So, you were staring at that guy because of this? His voice was low, almost growling. Not because of his body? I blinked, confused by the shift in tone. Of course. Why would I care about his body? Yours is better, anyway. Naturally, I kept that last thought to myself. Matthew's expression soured further, as if he'd just bitten into something rotten. The calm and collected demeanor he usually exuded cracked. He grabbed a towel and stormed toward the bathroom. But he forgot about the broken glass littering the floor. In an instant, I shot to my feet and grabbed his wrist. Watch out. Time seemed to freeze as we stood there, my hand gripping his. Matthew looked down slowly, his gaze settling on the spot where our skin met. Reality crashed back into me, and I yanked my hand away like I'd touched something burning. I didn't mean to touch you. Just didn't want you to step on the glass, I stammered, hiding my hand behind my back. Clenching my fist, I could still feel the lingering coolness of his skin, the firm structure of his wrist. Just that brief contact was enough to send my heart into chaos. Matthew lowered his eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting into what looked like a self-deprecating smirk. Yeah, I know. You don't like me. For a moment, I thought I heard disappointment in his voice. It had to be my imagination, right? Letting out a nervous laugh, I tried to break the tension. Go take your shower. Thanks to Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman's bet, Joseph had to treat the entire dorm to a meal and a weekend outing. We ended up on a bus headed for the countryside. But when we arrived at the hotel and tried to book our rooms, things got awkward. We'll take 2 standard rooms, Thomas said confidently. The receptionist gave us a regretful smile. I'm sorry, sir, but due to the high weekend demand, we only have 1 standard room and 1 themed room left. A silence so thick you could cut it with a knife descended upon us. Thomas broke it first, declaring, I'm not sharing a bed with Joseph. He moves around too much in his sleep. He wasn't wrong. Joseph wasn't just a sleepwalker, he was practically a martial artist in his dreams. There had been multiple incidents of him falling out of his top bunk at night, prompting us to install extra railings twice. After a brief moment of thought, I offered, how about this? I'll share the standard room with Joseph, and you can stay in the themed room with Matthew? It was a calculated suggestion. Joseph's erratic sleeping habits aside, my recent coming out made it seem less awkward for me to bunk with him, minimizing any potential tension. Thomas and Joseph seemed fine with the arrangement, nodding along. But Matthew, who had been silent until now, suddenly frowned and flatly rejected the idea. No. He paused, his tone brooking no argument. Eric and I will share a room. The room door clicked open with a swipe of the keycard, and the moment I stepped inside, I knew I was in trouble. The curtains? The hanging chair? It was a themed room, all right. I couldn't even bring myself to look around any further. Behind me, Matthew Grant entered as if none of it fazed him. He casually set his backpack down and started arranging his toiletries in the bathroom like this was just another day. I, on the other hand, was still reeling from what he'd said earlier. Eric and I will share a room. My eyes had practically popped out of their sockets at the time. Bro, did you forget I literally came out of the closet yesterday? But since neither Thomas nor Joseph had reacted strangely, I'd reluctantly agreed to the arrangement, though not without reservations. There's a double-edged sword to sharing a bed with someone you like. It's not all blissful daydreams. Sometimes, it's just pure, unrelenting torture. Sighing, I hung up my clothes in the wardrobe, still brooding over the impending night ahead. When I turned around, my breath caught in my throat. Matthew Grant was standing with his back to me, midway through changing. His bare, sculpted back was so close that I could practically feel the faint warmth radiating from his skin. Each inhale brought the subtle, clean scent of his body wash straight to my nose. Up close, handsome transformed into absolutely breathtaking. I stared, frozen, for a few seconds before I felt an all-too-familiar warmth creeping into my nose. Matthew seemed completely unaware, pulling on a fresh t-shirt before reaching for the waistband of his pants, preparing to. Clamping a hand over my nose, I bolted for the bathroom like my life depended on it. Behind me, I missed the faint curve of a smile tugging at Matthew's lips. Later, at the beach, Joseph Freeman and Thomas Lombard were locked in an intense water fight, splashing water everywhere. Matthew, still haunted by the memory of Yellow Line Guy, adamantly refused to get in the water. He lounged on a wicker chair by the shore, watching us like a king surveying his subjects. Meanwhile, I slumped against the edge of the pool, utterly drained. How was I going to survive this day? Just a glimpse of Matthew changing earlier had cost me 10 solid minutes of nosebleeding. If we actually had to sleep in the same bed tonight, I'd probably wake up with anemia. Suddenly, soft murmurs floated from behind me, tinged with excitement and shyness. He's so handsome and he's sitting there all alone. Do you think he's single? Why don't you go ask him and get his number? I can't. When do you go? You're gorgeous. He won't say no to you. I turned my head and spotted the source of the voices. 3 girls not far away, sneaking glances at Matthew. The one called Wendy really was stunning, tall, fair, with features so delicate she looked like a living doll. The kind of girl no straight guy could ever resist. My heart thudded painfully as I watched her approach him, phone in hand, moving with practiced grace. She leaned in and said something to him, her smile dazzling. Matthew froze for a moment, then he smiled back. Even from a distance, I could see it clear as day. And just like that, my heart sank. What could be more heartbreaking than watching the person you like get hit on right in front of you? I braced myself, watching as Wendy handed him her phone. But just when I thought they'd exchange numbers, Matthew raised a hand and pointed toward me. Wendy turned to look in my direction, her expression shifting to one of mild surprise. And that was the last thing I saw. Because right then, I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in the hotel room, an empty 4-drip bag hanging on the wall beside me. The man sitting by the bed noticed I was awake and quickly leaned in, his voice filled with concern. How are you feeling? Anywhere uncomfortable? I blinked at the worried face in front of me, momentarily disoriented. What happened to me? Matthew Grant pressed his lips together briefly before answering. You fainted from low blood sugar. What about Thomas and Joseph? They wore themselves out playing in the water and went back to their room to sleep. I glanced out the window at the pitch-black sky. I'd been out for hours. Here, eat something? Matthew accepted a tray of food from the room service attendant and set it on the small table by the bed. How can a mere mortal like me let the campus heartthrob serve me? I scrambled to sit up straight, reaching for the tray. I'll do it myself, I've got it. Predictably, our hands brushed against each other in the process. I yanked mine back as if burned, forcing a nervous laugh. I didn't mean to. Matthew lowered his gaze slightly. You don't have to keep saying that. I know you don't like me. The air between us turned awkward once again. Clearing my throat, I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. My attempt was clumsy at best. Hey, by the way, that girl who asked for your number earlier, what did you say to her? It seemed like you even mentioned me? You didn't ask her who she thought was more handsome between the two of yous, did you? Ha! I laughed at my own joke, hoping to lighten the mood. Matthew's deep, unreadable eyes fixed on mine, and he replied in a calm tone, Oh. I asked if we looked like a couple. Ha! I choked mid-laugh, coughing so hard my face turned red. Matthew let out the faintest sigh, barely audible, and reached out to gently pat my back. Was that really so shocking? I avoided his gaze, mumbling awkwardly, Don't joke like that. Knowing Matthew's personality, there was no way he meant it. Someone like him, saying something so ambiguous and teasing, it had to be a joke. The fact that he wasn't homophobic was already a blessing I wouldn't dare take for granted. How could I even entertain the thought that he might be gay? Or worse, interested in me? That was impossible. Completely and utterly impossible. By the time I finished eating, it was already 11 p.m. Having slept through most of the day, my eyes were wide open like saucers, and I felt so full of energy I could have gone for a few laps around the hotel. Matthew Grant emerged from the bathroom in a robe, towel draped over his head as he dried his damp hair. Turn on the projector and pick a movie, he said casually. I shook my head. No need. Don't let me keep you from getting some sleep. Matthew had a strict routine back in the dorm. Once bedtime hit, he wouldn't so much as glance at his phone, let alone stay up watching a movie. But before I could say more, the mattress beside me sank slightly. Matthew had taken a seat on the bed. "It's fine. I'm not sleepy." I mumbled a distracted reply, struggling to peel my gaze away from the droplets of water gliding down his long, elegant neck. Out of habit, I touched my nose, relieved to find it dry. I picked a highly rated disaster movie at random. As soon as I pressed play, the room went dark. Matthew had turned off the lights. Moments later, he leaned back against the headboard, his relaxed posture bringing his shoulder and leg into contact with mine. This room, this lighting, this atmosphere. I stared straight ahead at the projection screen, willing myself not to move a muscle. "Please fall asleep soon," I silently prayed. "I'll feel so much more at ease if you just doze off." But as the movie progressed, the gripping storyline started pulling me in. My tension slowly melted away, and I found myself relaxing against the headboard. Some time passed before Matthew suddenly pointed at a character on the screen and asked, "Do you think he'll die?" I shrugged. "Probably. Rich people in disaster movies never have it easy." My blunt answer caught Matthew off guard, and he burst into a quiet laugh. The awkwardness between us eased, replaced by a light, comfortable atmosphere. Coupled with the peaceful night outside, it was almost perfect. So perfect, I wished the clock would slow down. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when the movie reached its climax. The two main characters were at the edge of a steep cliff, facing a life-or-death decision. They turned to each other, their faces dirty and weathered, sharing an intense, lingering gaze. Then they kissed, a passionate, desperate embrace. The sound of their labored breathing and the wet smacks of their lips filled the room, amplified by the speakers and bouncing off the pink drapes surrounding us. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Matthew Grant froze, visibly stiffening. He awkwardly turned his head, glancing left and right, anywhere but at the screen. Somehow, the room only felt more awkward. By the time the movie ended, the clock had struck 1. A hint of weariness finally appeared on Matthew Grant's face. "Let's sleep," he said, his voice low. "Yeah, okay." Feeling as though I'd just been pardoned, I hurried to the bathroom to change into my pajamas. When I came out, Matthew was already buried under the fluffy covers, his eyes closed. I couldn't tell if he was asleep or just resting. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped into bed, pulling the blanket over me. I shuffled to the very edge of the mattress, creating a gap between us wide enough to rival the Great Rift Valley. Even with all that space, my heartbeat was anything but steady. Sharing a bed with him? Once, it was something I didn't even dare to dream of. Just as I was lost in thought, Matthew's voice suddenly broke the silence. "Eric, don't you think it's a bit cold?" "Cold? In July?" I frowned but still asked, "Should I turn the heat on?" "No need." His tone was casual. "Just move closer." No exaggeration. I swear my heart rate shot past 200 in that moment. The question I had swallowed countless times, afraid to voice, finally slipped out before I could stop myself. "Matthew, did you forget that I'm gay?" Matthew shifted, turning onto his side to face me. Half his face was buried in the pillow, and his voice came out muffled. "I didn't forget. But you said you don't have feelings for me, right?" I nearly choked on my own breath. "I said I don't have feelings for you to avoid prejudice, not to make you completely drop your guard. Fine. If he's going to play it like this, I might as well take advantage of the situation." I flopped back onto the bed with a resigned sigh, scooting toward the center until my arm brushed against his. "How about now? Still cold?" "Not anymore." I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the even rhythm of his breathing and the warmth radiating from his body beside me. "Control yourself, Eric Miller. Control yourself." Time slipped by once again. Just as I thought Matthew Grant had finally drifted off, his low voice broke the silence. "Eric, what's your ideal type, in a guy?" The question caught me off guard, clearing my mind of any lingering distractions. An image rose unbidden, vivid and untouched by the years, a youthful figure as radiant as ever. It was Matthew Grant, back in high school. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was during our second year, on the way home from school. A heavily pregnant woman, her belly swollen to 7 or 8 months, stood at the roadside, struggling to bend down and tie her shoelaces. There were plenty of students passing by, each sparing her a brief glance before hurrying on their way. I hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to help, but before I could get close, a figure dashed past me, a swift breeze trailing in his wake. Matthew Grant crouched in front of her, his fingers moving deftly as he tied her laces with practiced ease. "Thank you so much, young man," the woman said gratefully. "It's nothing," he replied with a small smile. The setting sun cast a golden glow across his profile, making him look almost otherworldly. Amid the hustle and bustle of the street, I distinctly heard the sound of my own heart skipping a beat. From that moment, a boy planted roots in another boy's heart. "Someone kind," I answered softly, my voice barely above a whisper. In the darkness, I felt Matthew's gaze lingering on my profile. His voice followed, steady yet probing. "Have you ever been in a relationship?" I shook my head. "No." Seizing the opportunity, I finally voiced a question that had puzzled me for a long time. "Matthew, you've made it clear you're not homophobic. So why do you hate Bruce so much?" The atmosphere shifted instantly, the room growing heavier as Matthew's expression darkened. His brows furrowed, and his voice dropped several degrees. "Because he..." What followed left me stunned, my thoughts spiraling in disbelief. So Bruce Young was an extreme bottom? From the very first day of freshman year, Bruce Young had set his sights on Matthew Grant, launching a relentless campaign to win him over. At first, Matthew responded with polite rejections, but Bruce was undeterred, pushing forward with dogged persistence. Forced to his limits, Matthew resorted to avoidance tactics, hoping the problem would resolve itself. Then came that day, the one I accidentally witnessed. A desperate Bruce cornered Matthew in the laundry room, dropping all pretense of subtlety. Without warning, he crouched down, reaching for Matthew's waistband and attempting to lean in. Matthew, understandably horrified, reacted on instinct, kicking Bruce away with enough force to send him stumbling. And then came the scene I walked in on. "Matthew, I like you." "Oh." "Disgust." "Me." I scratched my head, caught somewhere between disbelief and amusement. It turned out I'd been piecing together fragments of the story all wrong. What a colossal misunderstanding. But I had to admit, Matthew Grant seemed to attract more than his fair share of unwanted attention. Were all his admirers genuinely interested in him? Not entirely. Most of them saw him as a trophy, a high-level challenge to conquer, or a rare collectible to flaunt. It was less about love and more about the thrill of the chase. And for someone like Matthew, who was naturally introverted and unskilled in navigating social games, this constant pressure had only made him withdraw further over time. Which is why his recent efforts to engage with people, with me, felt like a small miracle. We spent the rest of the night talking, covering everything from campus gossip to must-visit travel destinations. It was as if we were making up for 2 years' worth of unspoken conversations in one sitting. When the first rays of dawn seeped through the gap in the curtains, the pull of sleep finally overcame me, and I drifted off with a contented smile. It was a good dream. Since that night of endless conversation, my relationship with Matthew Grant had grown by leaps and bounds. Our friendship strengthened with each passing day. Now, whether it was during class, after class, trips to the supermarket, or meals at the cafeteria, we were practically inseparable. Even Joseph, who was notoriously slow to pick up on things, couldn't help but comment one day, "You two are so close now, it's like you're dating or something." I laughed, picking up a slipper and chucking it at him. "Shut up, you idiot." But the thought lingered. Wait, could it be? Ever since last month, Matthew had been acting like a completely different person. He smiled more often, joked around with us, and even started joining in on our random conversations. The cold, aloof version of Matthew Grant seemed like a distant memory. But what stood out the most was the way he looked at me. There was warmth, intensity, even tenderness in his gaze, everything except indifference. When had this shift started? Was it that day I was forced to come out? Or even earlier, maybe the day I told him I wasn't homophobic? The thought gnawed at me, so later that evening as Matthew and I walked to the supermarket, I decided to test the waters. Keeping my tone casual, I joked, "Joseph said today that we're so close now, It's like we're dating or something. Inwardly, I was anything but casual. What if Matthew hadn't meant anything by his actions? What if my question made him realize this and he started to pull away? But I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. To my relief, Matthew didn't react strangely. Instead, he asked calmly, "Do you think it feels like that?" I forced a laugh. You kind of. And how does it feel? His question caught me off guard. I turned to meet his gaze, those deep, dark eyes locking onto mine. At that moment, a gentle summer night breeze swept past us, carrying a coolness that only comes after a long, scorching day. He was waiting, silently, patiently, for my answer. Somehow, against my better judgment, I nodded. "It feels great?" The words had barely left my mouth when Matthew came to an abrupt stop. I halted too, my heartbeat inexplicably speeding up as my breaths grew shallow. Standing nearly 10 centimeters taller than me, Matthew leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes reflecting my nervous expression. Then, in a voice steady and unwavering, he said, "Eric, tomorrow night at 8, meet me on the rooftop of the lab building. I have something to tell you." The next 24 hours were pure agony. My mind was in overdrive, obsessing over one question. What exactly does Matthew Grant want to tell me? I was so restless I half considered knocking myself out and waking up just in time for 8 p.m. And where had Matthew gone? He disappeared right after our last class, without so much as a word, even skipping dinner. I asked Thomas Lombard and Joseph Freeman, but neither of them had any idea. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, 7 p.m. rolled around. I took a quick shower and was about to head out for the lab building when, of course, disaster struck. While blow-drying my hair, the dryer suddenly gave out, sputtering white smoke and sparks from its base. Holy! Panicking, I yanked the plug from the socket and tossed the dryer across the room. My hair was still damp, and I couldn't go out looking like this. Since Thomas and Joseph didn't have their own hair dryers, they usually borrowed mine. I decided to message Matthew, asking if I could use his. Then I opened his locker. Matthew's locker was just like him, immaculately organized, with every item placed in perfect order, like something out of a display case. I grabbed his hair dryer and was about to close the locker door when something in the corner of the bottom shelf caught my eye. I froze mid-motion. Was that the spicy chips? Matthew didn't eat those chips. So, how did his lips get swollen? Swallowing hard, I stared at the bag, my thoughts racing. One by one, fragments of our past interactions replayed in my mind, details I'd overlooked now coming into sharp focus. What if I said it really was me? I'm the last person who'd want Eric to move out? So you were staring at that guy because of this? Not because of his body? Yeah, I know. You don't like me. Eric and I will share a room. Eric, what's your ideal type in a guy? The truth had been there all along. I just hadn't seen it. The campus buzzed with life that night. On the field, groups of guys played basketball, couples murmured sweet nothings, and artsy students strummed guitars, their voices drifting into the warm summer air. When I lift my head, you're looking at me. In your eyes, the summer night's fireworks gleam. My dull, gray heart begins to feel alive. Your presence heals me. The raspy melody caught my ears as I walked, my slow, hesitant pace quickening. Before I knew it, I was running, the wind roaring past my ears. I needed to see him. I needed to see Matthew Grant. When I reached the lab building, the campus sounds faded into the distance, as if coming from another world. The building stood silent, its surroundings deserted. I couldn't even wait for the elevator. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I sprinted all the way to the 6th floor. Bursting through the rooftop door, I saw him. Matthew Grant stood by the railing, arms crossed, the wind tugging at his clothes. The soft moonlight illuminated his face, making him look like something out of a dream. "You're here," he said awkwardly, straightening up as soon as he noticed me. His usual calm demeanor crumbled into a mix of nervousness and embarrassment, and he blurted out the most unnecessary observation. I gave a soft yeah, my voice steadier than I felt. Before he could say anything more, I held up the box of spicy chips in my hand. "So, it really was you?" Matthew froze for a second, his eyes widening in surprise before he rushed to explain. About that, I owe you an apology. At the time, I just realized how I felt about you, but I didn't know if you... I raised a hand to stop him, my heart pounding. Matthew, I hesitated, my voice quieter now. Have you always been gay? I don't know if I'm straight or gay, Matthew Grant said, his voice steady and resolute. I only know that I've fallen for someone. And that someone happens to be a guy. That someone is you. Eric Miller, I like you. The conviction in his tone left no room for doubt. My chest tightened, and my eyes stung with an overwhelming mix of emotions. With a hoarse voice, I reminded him, Matthew, you need to think this through. This isn't an easy path. The road ahead was littered with societal fences and thorns of judgment. It would be unbearably hard. If he wanted to back out now, I'd understand. I'd pretend none of this ever happened, chalk it up as another one of the countless dreams I'd had over the years. But Matthew Grant simply said, I know. But if it's with you, I'm not afraid. There were no words to describe what I felt in that moment. Happiness? That didn't even begin to cover it. Goddamn, I'm so happy I could burst. The next thing I knew, I was crossing the short distance between us in 2 steps. Without hesitation, I hooked my arms around his neck and pulled him close, closing the space between us. Our lips met, and in the warmth of that kiss, I murmured, I like you too. And I've liked you for much longer. Matthew's eyes widened briefly in surprise. But after a heartbeat of shock, he wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me even closer as he deepened the kiss. There was something irresistible about Matthew Grant, a magnetic pull I couldn't deny. Like a tipsy man savoring just the right amount of intoxication, I found myself utterly powerless to resist. Steep cliffs, winding paths, none of it mattered. As long as I could walk this road with him, every obstacle would melt into an open plain. The end.
Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.